This is a really inefficient market. You can use historical data and comparable sales of similar players, but at the end of the day, it is very inefficient in terms of how this stuff gets transacted. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Gordy Bonker Show. Thank you to our guest last week, Jeff Hopkins, for telling his story about him going on his own and building his own card business. Loved getting to sit down and talk to Jeff and hear that story. And for anyone who missed that episode, you can go back and watch it on the Sports Card Nonsense YouTube channel or listen to wherever you get podcasts, again, on the Gordy Bonker Show. So before we get into today's show, I'm going to be first, I got to get some stuff off my chest. It was a tough weekend for me and a sports weekend. Obviously, you see me decked head to toe here in my Ryder Cup gear. I'm a huge golf fan. I actually went to Bethpage Black this past weekend. I was there on Thursday for the practice rounds where I picked up this hat, and I just felt like we had it. Going into it, it's super hard to win on the road on a Ryder Cup. Europe had to play literally perfect golf this weekend to do it. There was good energy in the air in New York, and man, I am just so bummed about how that went. I, as a sports fan, was absolutely crushed in just seeing the absolute dominance that Europe put on. It was like on Friday and Saturday, they just couldn't miss. I don't think I can look at Tommy Fleetwood the same after that weekend. The other thing that I want to say about the Ryder Cup is I'm super proud of the way the Americans did rally back on Sunday. That could have been maybe the greatest sports comeback of all time if it was executed all the way. You know, once you see a couple of those guys on 18 drop those putts and all of a sudden the Europeans need that last point, it just felt like, man, this could be something special. That was one of the toughest losses, though, at the end when Henley came up short. I was a little disappointed in that. I almost got caught up believing. So the whole Ryder Cup experience was tough. That's the polo of the week this week. We've got the Ryder Cup polo. Love this Holderness and Bourne polo. They do a great job with their polos. Pick this up. But ultimately, at the end of the day, came out a little short. But it was such a cool experience. And that's one of the things I love about golf that's similar to baseball. The Ryder Cup has so much history attached to it. Golf has so much history attached to it. There's so much tradition involved. And I've just found myself super captured and just interested in that space. A lot of my collecting activity lately has been shifting towards golf. I always share with you guys when I pick up big cards in my personal collection in baseball. But it's getting harder and harder to find the stuff that I'm looking for my PC. I mentioned last week and the week before I picked up a 54 Jackie Robinson 8. There's only two 8.5s. It's very unlikely I even find a little bit higher of a card like that. My Hank Aaron is a 7. So for me, I still have that gene, that collecting gene. And I've been picking up golf stuff that I find interesting. At the National this year, I picked up a Jack Nicklaus signed golf ball. I picked up Tiger Woods' first professional event ticket. The other thing that I've been doing is when I go to different golf courses now, I buy a logo golf ball as well as a golf polo from that golf course. So that's part of the reasons why I love wearing these golf polos when I record these shows, show you guys the different polos in my collection, because I just love collecting. And I feel like right now that's where my collecting interests have been moving. And I think there's something to be said about that. You know, collecting is very instinctual. It's a trait that you have, but it also changes over time. You know, one of the things that's really stuck with me is I've collected 54 tops since I've gotten back into the hobby, but some of the other categories of baseball cards go in and out. You know, I collect some Satchel Paige stuff, some Babe Ruth stuff, anything that I personally see as a good alternative asset in my portfolio and I'm investing into on the sports card side. I look at, but I think, you know, collecting habits really do shift over time. And if you're a viewer of the show, you very much probably have had some sort of collecting behavior shift over time as well. So it's just something I enjoy getting to share with you guys a little bit of my journey. And I love golf, and anybody who's into golf, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm always happy to chat, talk about it. The other thing that happened over the weekend that was just brutal for me as a sports fan, I'm a Penn State alum. The Penn State-Oregon game, brutal loss. Tough to see. Again, no fight in the first half, and then Penn State rallying close in the end, going to overtime, giving us a little bit of hope. and then losing. It's tough. But there is a route for Penn State to still make the playoff. I'm not too concerned. That loss was nowhere near as bad as the Notre Dame loss in the college football playoffs last year. So honestly, the Ryder Cup loss hurt a lot more than the Penn State whiteout loss, which is saying something there. I just think the Penn State season's still very much alive. And for the U.S., it's kind of like, dude, where do we go from here? Do you need to shift who the captain is? Do you shift like how we go about selecting or how we develop the players? It's going to be interesting. But either way, that's a little bit over the weekend for me and the sports world. And again, love the Ryder Cup polo, my golf polo of the week. But today's show, I really want to get involved with a new subject topic that we haven't really broached yet on the show. And it's related to sports memorabilia versus sports cards. Particularly because over the weekend, Hunt Auctions put out Willie Mays' private estate collection. So this collection of Willie Mays memorabilia is the absolute tip of the iceberg in terms of the most sought after and valuable cards sought after and valuable pieces of memorabilia that you can possibly grab for a Hall of Famer. There wasn't a lot of actual cards, although there were a handful. We'll get into that. But I really want to take a deeper dive and look at the auction results of this Willie Mays auction, talk about some of the surprising results I had. I want to speak about memorabilia and the difference in valuation, as well as what the marketplace looks like for high-end memorabilia versus high-end sports cards. So that's going to really be the main subject of today's show. Before we get into the Willie Mays auction, I also want to highlight the card of the week. And the card of the week you'll see presented on screen here already is in the PSA vault on behalf of a client of mine. But over last week, I was able to purchase a handful of really, really exciting cards for a new client of mine. But this one specifically, this 1954 Hank Aaron PSA 8 makes the card of the week on the Gordy Bonker Show. The Hank Aaron rookie card, for me, needs no introduction. I personally think it is my favorite baseball card ever made. I think the Hank Aaron card market is one that has a lot of room to grow in terms of valuation. Hank Aaron, to me, is the all-time home run king, and I don't think his record will ever be broken. Now, a lot of people can debate me that Barry Bonds is the home run king, but I do think there's a lot to be said that Hank Aaron's record stands the test of time because of the fact that he did it cleanly. And when you add in the fact that Hank had to overcome so much difficulty in his early life, Hank Aaron started his career in the Negro Leagues. Just his story is unbelievably inspiring. And that rookie card to me is like artwork. I think it's one of the most beautiful cards, not only of the 54 top set, but of all time. I love the image of Hank. I love the orange, the color, it pops. This specific PSA 8 example that I was able to broker for my client was just an absolute amazing piece. And the buyer and the owner of this card is investing into this card for a long term. So he's going to be storing it in his PSA vault with a handful of other really awesome cards that I've been able to curate for him. And I'm super excited for him. I'm excited for, honestly, anybody who picks up any Hank Aaron card at any grade. I think it's an awesome buy. It's my favorite card, and that's why it gets the Gordy Bonker Show card of the week. So with that, let's dive into the Hunt auction results of the Willie Mays collection. So it is interesting that this auction honestly even happened. I'm going to kind of share my honest and uncandid thoughts about this auction as relate to Hunt auctions. I've never met anyone at Hunt. I'm sure they're great people. Obviously, they have a great track record to be able to be handling Willie Mays' family collection. But there is a couple things that surprised me when looking at the results of this auction. Before this auction even started, somebody in my audience sent me a message about it, actually partly because they were interested possibly investing in some of these items. So I actually did a deep dive over the weekend ahead of the auction and did some research about some of the key items that were in this auction, looking into what the estimates were versus what I thought the potential sales value of them would drive. I actually put together a little presentation, and I'll even reference some of the slides here that I made on behalf of this client of mine and kind of gave him my thoughts on whether or not I would be allocating capital to this stuff. So one of the first items that I take a look at when looking at Hunt auctions, this Willie Mays auction, one of the marquee items was a 1954 World Series ring that was given to Willie Mays. after winning the World Series. So obviously, World Series rings have always demanded a premium in the market. There are World Series rings that you can use as comparable sales. But this 1954 World Series is different, right? The 1954 World Series, Willie Mays makes the catch, maybe the most famous and iconic moment in World Series history. And this is the World Series ring that Willie got from that series. So that went up for auction this week. Now, I have to stop and stay right there. Did anybody know that this was coming up for sale? One of maybe the most important World Series rings ever minted was going up for public auction, and nobody really knew about it, and at least that I talk to in my world. And I do vintage sports cards and memorabilia full time. I am a content creator. I speak to investors, collectors. I'm very much in this world, and I had absolutely no idea that this auction was happening. So I'd have to think a lot of you in the audience also probably didn't know that this item and the rest of this collection was coming up to auction. And I really want to talk about that in a couple minutes on why this space is so interesting right now from an investing standpoint. Some of the other key items that went up for sale in this auction were Willie Mays' 1962 All-Star uniform, his 1954 National League MVP award from that same World Series season. Also, another notable item was his Hall of Fame induction ring. Hall of Fame induction rings, player issued, are always super collectible and have consistently gone up over time as well. So I was really interested to see where Hunt Auctions would put these estimates versus where they came in. And I'll actually have a graphic that I put together that can show you guys that. So I want you guys to take a look at this graphic. What you guys are looking at here is each one of some of these big marquee items that went up into this Hunt auction. The blue shade shows the estimate range. So for example, this 1954 World Series ring, which I believe was correctly valued in terms of what the estimate could bring. You'll see here, the blue shade shows the estimate that they thought it would go between $500,000 to $1 million. When I was looking at this auction ahead of time, I thought there's a very good chance that ring would blow the doors off the estimate. I told the client that I was speaking to, I think very well this card could go for north of $1 million to 1.5. It sold for less than the estimate of $500,000. The total sale on the 54 World Series ring was $458,250. So you'll see in that chart there, that red X is the actual sales price of these items. So the 1962 Willie Mays All-Star uniform, they put an estimate here between $500,000 and $1 million. Now, game used uniforms have been absolutely surging in valuation lately because you have to think back in the 50s and 60s and earlier, they were not given a ton of uniforms throughout the course of their seasons. It's not like today where players are getting tons of uniforms throughout the course of their year. So the number of these uniforms that are in existence just are very, very low. So when a game used all-star game uniform comes available to public auction, it's going to go for a lot of money, especially when it's somebody like Willie Mays. So again, I felt like the estimate made sense based on what some of the other comps were showing in previous game used uniforms of all-time greats. They had the estimate between $500,000 and $1 million for this uniform. The sale on the 62 uniform came in at $634,000. So in line with where they had saw the estimate. The next item I thought was interesting that, again, they were within the correct range was the 1954 National League MVP award. That sold for $446,000, right in line between that $250,000 and $500,000 estimate. The 1965 National League MVP award, that actually sold for $387,000. So obviously it doesn't, I don't think a 65 MVP would sell for the same as a 54 MVP because of the provenance of the 54 World Series season for Mays. And just like in sports cards, anything that's closer attributed to the early part of a player's career will always demand a higher valuation. So just calling a spade, a MVP from 1965 versus 54, the 54 MVP award will always demand more money. So $387,000 for the 65 to me seems like a pretty strong result. The 1954 Silver Slugger bat sold for $246,000. That estimate was between $200,000 and $400,000. This was the biggest shock to me, though. That 19 54 World Series ring underperforming, and then the Hall of Fame induction ring, in my opinion, overperforming. The Hall of Fame induction ring that was issued to Willie Mays sold for $446,500. Their estimate was somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000. So it massively overperformed where the auction house thought it would. Now, I'm trying to kind of scratch my head around this because the Hall of Fame induction ring, every player at any Hall of Fame caliber has a Hall of Fame induction ring, but not every player has a World Series ring that is attributed to such a culturally relevant event like the 54 World Series when Willie Mays makes the catch. So I looked into other Hall of Fame induction rings to compare. So the estimate on the Hall of Fame player induction ring was $100,000 to $300,000. Ted Williams Hall of Fame induction ring did $444,000 back in 2023. So if Ted Williams did 444 in 2023, I would think the Willie Mays Hall of Fame ring could potentially go for somewhere around there. And to be honest, that is probably where the comp came from because Willie's ring sold for 446. If you look at other considerable sales, Satchel Paige's Hall of Fame ring sold for $260 back in 2014. Yogi Berra's Hall of Fame induction ring sold for $90 back in 2016. But that ring surprised me that it sold for that valuation when the 54 World Series one underperformed. Either way, it kind of leads to this greater point that I want to make as I kind of get back into discussing just memorabilia valuations and the buying and selling, is that this is a really inefficient market. You can use historical data and comparable sales of similar players, but at the end of the day, it is very inefficient in terms of how this stuff gets transacted. I think if Hunt had done a better job at doing marketing leading into this event, whether it was utilizing social media, making more public-facing appearances from the auction house or representatives from Willie Mays' family to talk about these items, I think they would have garnered a bigger premium. Now, the Say Hey Foundation was the beneficiary of all of these sales. All of this stuff went to charity. I actually looked into some stuff from Hunt. It looks like the Hunt feel comfortable sharing majority of the higher ticketed items were bought by a guy named Ron Furman. He's a commercial real estate investor, grew up in New York, probably was a big Willie Mays fan. And the owner of these items, he's going to be displaying them in and around Oracle Park, which is super cool because these items are going to be continue to be engaged and appreciated by the baseball community. But still, regardless of that, it feels like the opportunity for these items to sell for more money was left on the table. And I really think the inefficiency of all these different auction houses choosing on how they want to go to market in terms of marketing and getting the interest on these items is different. I do think I've been in this industry for a few years. I'm very present on social media. I personally have benefited a great deal from learning how to market and being really present online. I still think there's so much room to grow for all of these auction houses, I'm not just picking on Hunt. I'm talking about basically every auction house that you buy cards from could probably do a better job of how they are marketing themselves. This industry is still lagging in a lot of different ways. And I think that is one of the main pieces there. So when you think about that, if you're able to identify a auction, whether it be memorabilia or cards, that maybe doesn't have as many eyeballs on it as another auction house or another platform would, that arbitrage becomes a really interesting investment opportunity. Whether or not you're in this for the short term or the long term, there is money to be made in just recognizing an opportunity that maybe other people haven't been. It's really a matter of what grouping of eyeballs is the most valuable when you look at this stuff. So it will be interesting. It looks like a lot of these marquee items are going to be preserved and on display for fans to enjoy. It's not like it's going to be commoditized like an asset. I'm not here to say one is better than the other, but it will be interesting to continue to follow kind of the performance of some of these memorabilia auctions at different auction houses and seeing if they reemerge in other places, which does happen way more often than you think. A lot of the clients of these auction houses are actually just buyers that represent other auction houses because they feel that they have a buyer pool that might be able to see more interest and therefore pay a bigger premium for some of these items. So that's one of the things that I've found super interesting about this space. Even for me personally, I am constantly using my network to identify buys and sales of specific cards, and just noticing how much opportunity exists out there because people aren't aware of stuff being for sale. I think it's going to be a really cool thing. So again, not picking on hunt auctions. I did a decent amount of research ahead of the show today, just looking into some of their previous sales. I mean, they've brokered collections on behalf of Babe Ruth's family, on Ted Williams' family. They've done some big names, but I think there is always room to improve. And I think from a social media perspective, social media is really where people are spending their time and attention. If you're scrolling TikTok, if you're scrolling Instagram, that is where you are, essentially watching television like 10 years ago, right? So if you're an entity and you're not creating content about the products that you are buying or selling or entertaining your audience, like that is really where people are winning right now. So whether it's hunt auctions or it's any of the other auction houses, I think there's plenty of places to see, better marketing opportunities. So, one of the last pieces I wanted to touch on when talking about this Willie Mays auction, as well as anything related to memorabilia, is the pros and cons of investing into memorabilia versus investing into sports cards. Now, this is how this whole conversation got brought up to me over the weekend. I had a client who was interested in possibly investing a sizable portion of his alternative asset portfolio potentially into these Willie Mays items. And he wanted to know, should I invest into this or should I invest into maybe a high-end sports card? And I'll share with you guys exactly what I shared with him because I think it's super valuable information for people that are interested in themselves investing into the space. The pros of investing into memorabilia is that the value that is derived from that memorabilia is very subjective, because maybe there are somewhat comparable sales of a similar player, but it's not like you're going to see multiple sales of a 54 World Series ring worn by Willie Mays in maybe the most famous World Series ever all that often. So when it comes down to the value of it, it really gets drawn down to it's worth what somebody's willing to pay. It's a very inefficient price, as opposed to, let's say, a high grade 52 Mickey Mantle card where there are public records of that card dating back 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. It is a little bit more of a liquid asset in terms of the buyer pool for a 52 Mantle and a high grade is way, way, way higher than the buyer pool for a really unique specific piece of memorabilia. So if you're interested in a little bit more of a safety net in terms of the liquidity, high grade vintage sports cards are always going to be a safer route, especially when you're able to track the historical performance of that specific card in that specific grade. So those are some of the things you got to think about when choosing to invest into memorabilia or choosing to invest into sports cards. I personally am a big sports card investor. I don't invest into memorabilia. I like the liquidity and the maturity of the sports card market. I also like the ability to store and display sports cards versus memorabilia. Game used uniforms have really grown a lot in valuation lately because of their scarcity. That's something that's very easy to articulate and educate to an investor. But the other side of that, for me personally, is I couldn't display a game used uniform with the space that I currently have. So if you're looking to enjoy this asset as an investment as well, I personally think sports cards are a little bit more easy to enjoy unless you have a lot more space and you yourself want to figure out a way to display your collection much like a museum would, which I'm not saying people don't. I've seen it. I know guys that do it. It's super cool. But those are just some of the pros and cons of kind of choosing what you're going to allocate your capital towards. So I find all that stuff to be super interesting. At the end of the day, sports cards, sports memorabilia, it's an alternative asset as a diversification in a portfolio. By no means should it be a huge chunk of your portfolio, but it's super interesting that this stuff commands the premiums that it has been. It's going to continue to go up because of all the things we've talked about on this show, because of the scarcity, because of the increased demand in collectors coming into the space, because of the amount of capital and cash that's sitting on the sidelines like we talked about last week. Those are all really undeniable trends. that are consistently happening in the marketplace. So I thought this week's episode would be super cool to kind of take a deeper dive into looking at memorabilia, this specific Willie Mays collection, as well as thinking about, hey, where is there an arbitrage in terms of the marketing of this specific item, these auction houses maybe versus other traditional auction houses. It's a very much a Wild West in a lot of ways. So I hope you guys have found that interesting. As I'm wrapping up this week's podcast episode, I want to remind everybody, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Gordy Bonker Show on YouTube, as well as give me a 5-star rating. Please like and subscribe wherever you get these podcasts. I am really trying to grow this, hopefully get this out there to not only more collecting people that are interested in the collecting side of the hobby, but also the investing side. So share it with a buddy who's interested in talking about finance and investing as well. Again, you can also follow all of my content. My name's Gordy Bonker. You can follow all of my content at Bonkers Cards on all of my social media channels. You can find me at Bonkers Cards on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, as well as, most importantly, go subscribe to my newsletter where I'm publishing a lot of these insights weekly about the sports cards market. So check that out at bonkerscards.substack.com. I'm putting out content for free there, as well as for my paid membership program, the Bonkers Cards Club, where I'm writing exclusive content on the newsletter, as well as giving early access to collections that I'm purchasing, as well as giving you guys a monthly invitation to the Bonkers Cards Club that I host over Zoom to allow you guys to jump on the Zoom, ask me any questions you have about the vintage sports card market, and meet other vintage collectors. We're approaching 150 members of the Bonkers Cards Club, which is awesome. I really want to make it the biggest and best vintage card collecting community in the world. And I want to thank the Sports Card Nonsense Media Group and everybody else on the team for making this episode possible. I'm super excited for next week. And hopefully we'll see you guys on the other side with a Penn State W. And hopefully we'll be over that Ryder Cup loss by then. So guys, thank you so much for that. That is this week's episode of the Gordy Bonker Show.